You may ask yourself, why did the Monday morning discussion group decide to do the book called The Acts of the Apostles? When they had like 66 books, they've already done Mark, so they had another 65 books they could have chosen from. Why did they choose Acts? Well, they chose Acts because for many people, the thinking is that the Acts of the Apostles, which is the story of the beginning of the church, is the age that is most like today. There was no established church. There was a story that was wanting to be told, but they weren't sure who was going to tell it. And so the Monday morning group decided, let's explore and let's invite people to explore the Acts of the Apostles in a day when the church was small and struggling and needing to find a path. Because we think that the church is small and struggling and still needing to find a path today. So, I'm here today to give you an introduction, an overview, if you will, of the Acts of the Apostles, so that when you start reading it, you'll say to yourself, okay, I kind of have a general view of what the overall themes are, or what I'm going to find here. I have to tell you, compare, like, for those of you who read Mark when we did It's All About Mark, he has some interesting stories, but he's kind of pithy and he just gives you the point and goes on to the next one. Well, Acts is full of great stories. You'll really enjoy reading just how dynamic it is. And Luke is a great storyteller. So there's things there that you'll never realize were in the Bible, and I can't talk about today. You know, you never talk about those things in church. So 3 points about this great book of the Acts of the Apostles. An overview. 1 point is that Acts of the Apostles is the story of the transition from a church that is focused and a community that's focused around the physical Jesus to being a church that is focused and led by this much more nebulous Holy Spirit. So this is the age of the Spirit that Acts is talking about. And there is, in the age of the Spirit, always much more room and space for people to be creative and for people to explore what does this story of Jesus really mean. It's the age of the Spirit. This age of the Spirit is going to last until sometime in the 300s, maybe 325. And then we're going to move into much more the age of the church from 325 until about 1970. And from the 1970s onward, the New Age movement and all that kind of thing, historically, we are back at the age of the Spirit. We are back in an age where things are much more nebulous. People don't want to be told what to believe. They want to discover it. They want to experience it. And so the present day church is, I believe, similar to the Acts of the Apostles church, because people wanted to experience a living, breathing sense of the Spirit of Jesus. And they were willing to listen to the story, but if it didn't resonate in their hearts, they weren't interested because they had other faiths and other experiences. Luckily for us, the Spirit of Jesus did resonate with so many people, and so the Christian church was launched. But the story of Acts is a story of, if people couldn't have caught the vision, the enthusiasm, the spirit of the church, of the message of Jesus, it just would have dwindled and died. So this is a dynamic book. One of the ways that the Spirit got unleashed, and one of the movements that happened in the book of Acts, and it's the second theme that I want to talk to you about today, is when Jesus was in Jerusalem and in Galilee, he had his 12 disciples around him. And when he sent them out, he called them apostles. And they took and they stayed in Galilee and in Jerusalem. Some of them started to travel, but it became quite local. And Peter, who was the cornerstone and the rock upon whom the church was to be built, he stayed in Jerusalem. Staying in the familiar territory would have been the death of the Jesus movement. But what happened was, there was the Spirit called forth new leadership. Leadership who didn't just stay in the locale that Jesus had been in, but the Spirit speaks to the heart of a person by the name of Paul. Well, he was originally called Saul, and he was a great persecutor of the church. He was a Pharisee, and he was known to be ruthless in trying to eliminate this new movement that was launching itself out of Judaism. But he got converted. The Spirit spoke to him in a way that actually they talk of as a metaphor, that he was struck blind and he couldn't see, and he realized he couldn't see. And then the Spirit gave him back his sight, and he realized that he had been so wrong to persecute, that actually he was called to be a leader of this new movement. It's my personal opinion, and from the kind of work that I've done, that without Paul, the Christian church never would have survived. Paul was this energetic fellow who knew that the faith couldn't stay inside its comfortable circle of geography. And so he traveled throughout the Roman Empire, throughout Asia Minor, and everywhere he went, he told people the story of Jesus, and he told them that this was now the age of the Holy Spirit, and that had been a gift from Jesus, and this Holy Spirit would touch their hearts, and they would come to see that this vision of life that Jesus of Nazareth had shared with the people, that this was a compelling vision by which they could encircle their lives. And so churches started. Paul was also a great letter writer, and he kept communicating with the new churches. What's happening here is something that we talk about quite a bit sometimes in our church today. There was succession unplanning. We call it succession planning, you know. We've got long-time leaders and who's going to take over, and we try to plan for that. Well, the disciples didn't have a succession planned, but yet the Spirit called into their midst Paul, who would become a leader that had an energy and a vision that took them to a whole new level. It's a time of the founding generation having to see the vision that came from when they knew Jesus to being a vision that was changed. You know, to start with, they thought that to become a Christian and to become a follower of Jesus' way, well, you had to practice circumcision because we've always done it that way. But that's because they were an offshoot of Judaism. If they wouldn't have changed that, I'm of the opinion that the movement never would have caught fire the way it did in the Gentile community. If they would have said, okay, everybody who's going to come to Jesus has to be circumcised. No, you had to let go of the old way. Because as these people, these new people, these Gentile people came, well, they weren't going to do it the same way. And so there's a dynamic movement as you see the early church moving from this central location of Jerusalem and Galilee and taking it throughout the Mediterranean and the Asian and the community all the way over to Rome. And Paul and his followers are largely responsible for it. Now, what they were doing as they traveled around was what we used to call new church development, and we currently call church planting. They were planting churches in every place that they went. They were finding new ways to tell the story of Jesus because they needed to speak to a different culture, a different time, and a different people. And so the Gentile mission begins. And they planted churches everywhere they went and sent letters back to keep encouraging those new churches. They were successful. They started a mission to the Gentile community that spread continually northward and also to the south. And before long, the church, this Spirit-led church that surrounded itself with the stories of Jesus, no longer looked like the church in Jerusalem had looked. It was something entirely new, felt different, more philosophical, less story. So away they went. This expansion to the Gentile mission, that's what they call it in Acts, changes the whole course of the Christian church. And as they say, the rest is history. So I went to a course Friday. It was held at Emmanuel Baptist Church. And Mark Green heard about it. And it was a course for evangelical church planters in Victoria to come and learn new skills and to come and hear what the actual situation is that they are dealing with when they want to plant a new church in Victoria. And I have to tell you, it was fascinating. And it was very weird to be there as United Church people. Some of the things that I discovered. You know, it was called Nuns in Canada. Okay? Don't think about black habits. Think about N-O-N-E-S. That's what they're calling, that's the phrase. Nuns are people who have grown up without ever hearing the stories of Jesus in their homes. They have never probably had grandparents that told them the story. They've had none of that story touch their lives. They don't even know it exists. And 50% of people in Victoria, in a 2013 survey that was done by Pew Research, said they were nuns. There's another category that is quite strongly influenced by mainline churches. They're called duns. I am so done with church. When people leave the mainline churches, they most often become duns. So, here we were, and you know, in the United Church, we're like thinking about how are we going to kind of organize ourselves so that we can kind of keep doing what we're doing for longer. How do we become more sustainable? These evangelical church planters are on fire to create a new movement that's going to look very different from this building, and it's going to be engaging with people in the 18 to 34 category. And this course spent 3/4 of their time saying everything you hear about American evangelism and mega churches and all that kind of stuff, it does not apply in Canada, and it certainly does not apply in Victoria. And we were all going, okay, you know, we felt this, but it was good to hear something that was purely Canadian. And then 1/4 of it was, how do we move forward then as church planters who have a passion to see the stories of Jesus be planted for a new generation and continue to live? How do we unleash the Spirit? And the answer was, we have to change our attitude. I gotta stop. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I got so carried away, but it is time for me to stop. So Okay, if you want to know the answer, you'll have to come back. Thanks for listening.